Just testing audio. Okay. Okay, good. All right, before we get into today, I want to pass out your exams. Did everyone stay warm and dry? Kind of. Except for when you were sledding or whatever you happened to be doing. So, I apologize. Some names I know and some I don't. I'm not doing a good job. Daniel? Okay. Yeah. He's not here yet. She's not here yet. If I remember, I'll cut off this part of the recording. If not, I apologize if you're listening to the recording and you can hear me handing out tests. David? Okay. Emily? Matt? So the grade should be posted to Canvas. Peyton? Okay. Tana? Is it Tana? Tana. Okay. Thank you. It's Gabby, right? Okay. Kaylee? Sorry. Yeah. Joseph? Natalie? Yep. Brandon, not here yet. Okay. Was that everybody? Okay, cool. That's here. Awesome. So there are a few things I learned in reviewing the slides for today. So we had talked a little bit about anthropometry or anthropometry, however you'd like to say it. I'm not sure that there's one that's right over the other, but it's a word that means, actually, can someone tell us what anthropology means? Anthropology. Has anyone heard that term? Okay. What do you think it means? Okay, good. A lot of times, I think it's in the context of culture, for example. I find it really interesting, but there's lots of different types of anthropology. I know someone who's a medical anthropologist, so they've studied medicine as it's been practiced, since, from history to today. Anyway, so anthro is a word that means human. And what does metry mean? Often. Think of, the only words I can think of are kind of technical, but there's spirometry, there's spectrometry. So it means measurement. So the measurement of humans. We're going to talk about that a little bit. I had mentioned that, for someone to find out where the center of mass is for your forearm with your hand attached, I mean, you know, of humans, someone's job, probably a grad student's job somewhere, to cut up cadavers and actually like weigh them and find the center of mass. Anyway, so that would be an interesting job. We're going to talk about the relationship or effect that some of these have on body size, basically. So age, gender, ethnic group, and nationality, just a little bit. So what I would like to do here is for you to get in your groups and interpret, each group is going to interpret one of these figures. But let me write the legend on the board because I'm sure you can't really see it very well. SH, so that's this one is sitting height, I believe. Yes, sitting height. This one is basically the length of your butt to your knee, BK. We'll have the same group do this other part as well. So this is the knee height. So basically your heel to your knee. Let's assign these so you guys know what you're doing. You two, why don't you guys do SH? So sitting height, that's this one. So take a look at it, be able to interpret it for us. I'll get to the axes in just a minute and what they mean. And why don't you guys do BK and NH? So around the knee. HL. I think my markers is head length. I have a big head, literally, not necessarily, maybe figuratively as well, but some people have big heads like me and some people don't. I have to adjust hats and stuff to the almost to the max, not quite, but so head length. Why don't you three in the back do head length? So that's this one. So you two can do foot length, this one. And in the very back, you three can do BD, which is bideltoid breadth. So that's one you may have to look up. And I will do the last one. Bideltoid breadth. And I'll do the last one. That is the hip breadth. Don't worry about the two. Well, I mean, I guess you probably can't see the difference. So don't necessarily worry about interpreting this part unless you can see it. But the dark dots are for boys, and I'm not sure what ages, boys and men. Okay, boys and men. And the ones with white in the middle are girls and women. The x-axis here is your age, and I mean just age in general. So this is birth, goes up to 16, then it kind of jumps between 16 to 20, and then 20 to 80. So it's how those body measurements change as we age, which I find to be really interesting. I didn't think we changed that much. Once we reached 18 or 20, kind of set, right? Except, kind of shrink over time. But anyway, so the y-axis is the percent of, to make sure I get this right, percent of stature. So the percent of your overall stature. So if you were sitting or standing, what percent does your, for example here, do your legs contribute? You know, some people, if you've ever noticed, some people have like really short legs and like a long torso, or the opposite, have like a really short torso and long legs. It's basically talking about the percentage that each of those segments contributes to your height or your stature, sitting or standing. So take like 30 seconds and be ready to describe what's happening in your graph to the class. So what's happening over time? So sitting height, let's go with you guys. Okay, good. So when we're younger here, our sitting height in proportion to the rest of our stature actually decreases. But then after, you know, so this is, I know you can't really see the lines from where you are, but you know, around puberty, we suddenly start this arc, like you said, and sitting height increases in terms of the proportion of our stature, which is interesting. So we sit higher. We when we're really young, we actually sit higher, much higher. Any guesses on why? That would, so like if you were to see someone that, well, I know people who are really short and they get made fun of because when they're, you know, if they're sitting and then they stand up, you know, there's not much change in, you know, like they're still the same height. There's a lady who used to be the risk manager for the city of Prescott. She's 4 foot something anyway. And the police officers would, I mean, it was all in good fun, but they would be like, are you sitting or standing, Lori? Anyway. So, but anyone where you might find that would be the most true would be really young kids. And I think part of the reason for that is they have big heads proportional to their body, and that their head is just so massive that when they're sitting versus standing, there's not as much difference. Anyway, and then we start to stretch out. But as we get older, it kind of arcs, like you guys mentioned. All right, let's look at the butt to the knee and the knee height. So what did you guys think?
Like you said, you're growing as you're being able to start to plateau. You get started. It's like after that's your height.
Good. So in relation to the rest of our body, our legs start getting longer. There's kind of this, well, so this is for knee height. The knee height kind of plateaus and then drops a little bit, but then they're both pretty steady. So a little bit of increasing for the upper leg there. That's a good question. Yeah. I don't know. So this is all proportional to your own, you know, to that. For example, if this represented a person, that would be the proportion related to their own body length. I don't know why. women's femurs basically tend to be slightly longer, apparently, or something compared to the rest of your body length. I don't know. I'm sorry. But it is interesting. It is interesting also that you can see that they are pretty tightly clustered until after the age of 20. Maybe it has something to do with childbearing. I don't know. But all right. Head length. We had head length. You guys?
Yeah, so pretty much they got big heads and they're little.
Good. I guess I'd stole your thunder, but yeah. So babies proportionally have a huge head, and it's not that they're totally uncoordinated when they're first trying to walk, but just that their head is so big, so they're kind of top heavy and, prone to plunk over. All right, foot length.
So as you grow or age, your feet are growing, and then you just sort of like fill into like the size really.
Yeah. It's interesting how there is. I mean, there's not a ton of change here compared to some of the others, but there's a slight decrease over time. And after around the age of, what was that one? That's probably 14 or something. Your foot grows more slowly than the rest of you. So, like you said, kind of if you've probably seen, like, I'm thinking of young men, boys, but like they have, like, it looks like they have skis for feet, basically. I mean, you're like, wow, you could go skiing without any equipment. That's kind of what's happening. Is the foot grows faster and then the rest catches up. All right. BD. Oh yeah, bideltoid breadth. So first, what does that mean? Okay, good. So what's going on?
So it looks like you start out with wider shoulders, start growing.
Yep, good. And I guess I'm going to point out a contrast here. So to contrast with mine, so mine is basically the hip width. And so for guys, shoulders start to grow faster than are growing faster than the rest of the body. And for women, the hips are growing wider faster than the rest of the body. Well, I guess what I found most interesting here is the changes after puberty, because I mean, I know we change as we hit that stage, which most of us are usually glad to be done with, but but I found it really interesting, the changes after after the 20s. This is a chart on grip strength, so we'll just do this one together. So the black is men and the white circle is women, and this is age, and this is I'm not totally sure the units here, but sort of force in kilograms. So what's happening? So I used to be a scoutmaster for Boy Scouts. I was also a Boy Scout when I was younger, and it's interesting about they start doing what they call high adventure activities around this age, 14 and plus, 15, 16. And I was told, I don't know if it's true, but I was told that part of the reason for that is that young men, anyway, when they reach that age, they're finally able to sort of accumulate muscle mass. So if young kids are working out, they accumulate some, obviously, but as we get older, we're able to accumulate more. Anyway, so I found that interesting there. So just like with almost everything in life, things get better until we reach about 21, and then everything gets worse, right? You guys haven't really experienced too much of that yet, but trust me, things just stop working as well as they used to. And I used to play basketball and flag football, not competitively, but in like intramural type sports. And like when you're young, you can pick up something. It's amazing how quickly you can pick up something and just do it. I started training for a half marathon when I was 22, and I was like catching up to to other people. I mean, in terms of their training, pretty soon I was able to to run farther, faster than other people. Now, I mean, I'm the one that's the caboose at the end behind. Anyway, it is still possible to train to a high level as you're older. It's just it takes more work, and you have to be more careful that you don't hurt yourself. It's true for men and women. So this also includes nationality, although we don't have huge diversity here. It's just between the U.S. and Britain. So, I mean, I guess depending on when this was taken, I'm not sure which country would have had more diversity in terms of like ethnicity, for example. But maybe there's not a lot of difference between the two countries. I don't know. So they've done this by the dots. So the dark squares are American men, dark circles British men. The light squares are American women, and the light circles are British women. And which country has more stature? Yeah, not to brag, but no. Why do you think that might be? Why would Americans be taller than British? Reed is a very English name, so I'm very plain old English. And I mean, at least towards the beginning, founding of the country, there was probably a lot of similarities between the two in terms of families and just genetics. So why? So one thing that I've heard, I don't know if it's true, is nutrition. I think, I don't know about today, but in general, in our past, we've had more access to better nutrition, I think. I can't speak to the last like 20 or 30 years because I know we have obesity problems, and I know our life expectancy is actually starting to decrease for like the first time ever, partly because of obesity. But well, I don't know. Anyway, it's just interesting to look at some of these. So this is for ethnic groups. So here we have a little more diversity. The dark circles are European. The white circles are Indo-Mediterranean. The light squares are Far Eastern, and the dark squares are African. So this is sitting height, but it's in proportion to your stature. So you can see the y-axis has sitting heights in millimeters, so almost a meter at the very top, and then the total stature, so standing height, 1,800 millimeters. This is interesting because this must be averaged over populations, because there are plenty of people who are at least 2 meters tall. But anyway, you can see that generally they're related, right? You see a nice line there. I mean, there's a little bit of scattering, but you can also see how torsos compare to legs, for example. So this group, let's see, so Far Eastern, their torsos, it looks like, tend to be a little bit longer in proportion to their legs. And then the squares down here. So for Africans, their legs in relation to their torso tend to be longer. And I have no idea why that is. But the point is, there's variation in the population. Even if you're not looking between men and women or ethnicities, there's variation, and we need to keep that in mind when we're thinking about designing our workplace. So here you can see growth rates for from birth to to age 18, so adulthood for boys and girls. It's interesting. So the fastest growths happen at the very start, and then we hit puberty and we kind of get this bump where it's not quite as fast as when we were little tiny babies. But does anyone have like a niece or nephew or, you know, a little baby that you get to see with some frequency, maybe a younger sibling? Okay, so how long does it take for like a newborn baby's face to change to, instead of like a newborn infant, to just like a little baby? Okay, and I would say even less. So I have an unfair advantage because I've had kids, so I get to see it every day. But you can start to see changes within just a couple weeks. You see their faces start to change. Well, they fill out. That's one thing. You know, some babies are born really big already, but generally, you know, the smaller ones, they'll fill out and they look different in just a few weeks. So there's a lot of growth going on there. Static dimensions refer to most of what we've been looking at so far: size of body. Dynamic dimensions are for movement. So here you have some static measurements: knuckle height, elbow height, shoulder height, eye height. When we're sitting, there's also different heights that we're interested in. And then look, here we have that width or breadth. So hip breadth, elbow to elbow breadth, and it's not depicted, but shoulder breadth or width. This is a figure that we're going to look at in a few more slides. So it's a top-down view of someone sitting at a workstation. Most of the time now we think of computers, and the case studies we're going to look at are for computer workstations. But you could also think of this in terms of any other workstation where you're sitting, like in a cockpit, for example. That would be a workstation if your job is to fly. And there's a center point that we're interested in. From above, it looks like it's right on top of the center of the head, but it's really actually down below at the bottom of the butt. And that's called the SRV, or seat reference vertical. So everything is in reference to that. That's the reference point, like the zero origin on an XY chart. You can see, so we're going to see lines just like swirls and maybe wonder what the heck is going on. So these lines indicate the reach of this operator, this person. So the very far line is the extent of their fingertips. I believe this center line is for the thumb, and then this this more medial line towards the middle is the wrist. So just a couple of different examples of restrained versus unrestrained dynamic dimensions. So it's just to see how someone's reach changes if they're restrained versus unrestrained. And I'm not exactly sure how they restrained the operator. It could have been with like PPE, for example. They had to wear certain clothes for their job, and those clothes got in the way of them reaching. It may have been some other way. I'm not sure, but you get to kind of see the difference there between the two. So this is males and females, and you don't need to really look at it because you can't see it, but the solid lines are for restrained and the dashed lines are for unrestrained. So you can see in front of them, for whatever reason, they're able to get more reach while they're being restrained. But then on the side, the restrained reach is actually longer. So I don't know what was going on there, but luckily, body and strength dimensions are distributed normally. So we talked a little bit about normal distributions. So it'd be a nice bell curve. And that's nice because there are lots of assumptions that we can make, and we can use things like a 90% confidence interval to describe a population and their sizes or their strength. So I'm not going to ask you to remember this equation, but I think that the concept is what's important. So let's take a look at it on the board over here. So confidence, if someone had stats and feels comfortable explaining confidence intervals or taking a guess, guesses are good. Okay. So let's say we're designing a workstation for let's say this is for a remote operator of a UAV. Am I using the correct terminology there? It's like a remote pilot for a UAV. So my brother was thinking about doing that for the military. He ended up not doing it, but so you go to work in an office, I assume, and but you're at a workstation that's probably similar to a really nice gaming setup. I've seen remote workstations for heavy equipment in mining, and they've got like 6 big TVs in front of them, each showing a different angle of operation, and then like 2 joysticks with all these buttons. Anyway, sure, it's something kind of like that if you're operating an unmanned aerial vehicle. Is that what UAV stands for? So, and you want to design that workstation to fit 90% of the population. What you need to find out is what the 90% confidence interval is. Now that's maybe my example isn't a perfect example here, but we'll back up. So you're designing a workstation for a remote operator, and you want to make sure it fits as many people as possible. We can't measure arm lengths and heights and everything of every person that is going to operate a UAV remotely. So we take a sample. We talked a little bit about this, but say there are, I don't know, but say there are 10,000, it's probably a lot less, but at least right now, 10,000 remote UAV operators in the world. We don't have time or money to measure all of them. Not that we'd want to, but knowing that this sort of information is distributed normally, we can take a sample. So let's say we measure 100. And if we plotted it on a histogram, and these would be little bins for, let's say it's the sitting height for the operators that we were interested in. We get something that looks like this. So there would be, let's say this is 0.8 meters. like the chart that we were looking at before. So most, if we're looking at standard deviations, we could go just a couple standard deviations away from our average. So this would be the mean or the average. And we could get most everybody if we're designing for anyone in this range. So I haven't drawn it to scale very well there, but 2 standard deviations. Let me ask you guys. So what percent of the population should be contained within 2 standard deviations? So you're close, a little higher. About 95. It's not exactly 95%. And again, I haven't drawn it very well, but so within 2, if you've collected these data, once you find the average, you can pretty confidently assume that 95% of your population is going to fall between these lines. And so, I mean, I don't know, let's say this is 0.6 and 1 meter. It's probably not that extreme, but then you could start to design your workstation with this in mind and say, well, I'm sorry, Shaquille O'Neal, UAV operator, and I'm sorry, really short person, UAV operator. We're not going to be able to quite fit you in very well, but we can get about 95% of people design this workstation so that it fits. What an confidence interval does is it allows us to have, and in this case, a 90% confidence interval. What that means is we're 90% confident that the true average, so of our remote operators, is inside that range. So let's say if we were looking at an interval, let me draw another bell curve. We took our 100 measurements. If we were to measure all 10,000 remote operators, we would find the true average because we would have sampled the entire population. We can't, we don't have money, we don't have time for that. So we measure 100, and we decide, we take the average and we find it's right here, where we would have guessed to find it. When we take a 90% confidence interval, what it means is, it would give us some numbers. So let's say it would be 0.75 on this side, and it's not very visible for you guys. 0.75 on this side and 0.85 on that side. What that would tell us is that we're 90% sure that the true average, if we were to measure all 10,000 people, would fall somewhere in here. So that's what a normal distribution allows us to assume, is we can calculate the confidence interval, and then we can, with some confidence, 90% confidence, assume that the true average is somewhere between these 2 lines. This is an example of British men. So the 50th percentile, so the median for heights is 1.75 meters. And they have a standard deviation of about 0.7 meters. I know we don't use meters really, but if we wanted to calculate the 90% confidence interval, what you do is you take your average. I don't expect you to remember how to do the equation. I just want you to know how it works, basically, what it means. So this is mu, the mean, our average, and then it's plus or minus. So remember, we went on either side. So we went plus and minus a z-score multiplied by our standard deviation. You look up that z-score in a table, and for this one, it happens to be 1.645. And then you multiply it by the standard deviation. So it's not that complicated, but again, I don't want you to remember how it works, just what effect it has. So if we were to look at a 95% confidence interval, what happens is the lines come out because the number is larger. I think it's like 1.96. So for a 95%, if we want to be 95%, not just 90, but 95% confident that we have the true mean somewhere, this number goes up, and that means that these lines come out. So the 95% would be out here. If you just want to be, 50% confident, then this number comes down, and then your range gets much smaller, and you're not as confident, and the range is smaller. There's one other way that we can make the range we can't make the range, but there's one other term here that would make the range tighter or wider, so more narrow, and that's the standard deviation. If we have, you guys tell me, I have two distributions here. One is like that, one is like this. Which one has, let's say this is A and B, which one has the larger standard of deviation? Huh? A does. Why? Good. So standard deviation is basically just a way of measuring how variable, how spread out our data are. So if you have a really small standard of deviation like this one, then your confidence interval is going to be really tight as well. So the confidence interval would look like this, whereas in this distribution, it's going to look like that. So if the 100 remote operators that you sampled were all kind of the same build and measurements, then you have this. If you had a huge variety, then you have this. Which one would be easier to design for? B, because you have a really narrow confidence interval, a really narrow range there of heights and weights to deal with. And real life isn't always like that, unfortunately. So when we're designing a workstation, our goal is to reduce injuries, increase productivity. Those both can go hand in hand if you do things right. You also, if you want to think of the consumer side, for example, product design, the ease of use and the market status, one thing that that has really changed with this in the consumer market recently has been a focus on ergonomics and the ease of the user interface. And I'm trying, there's another user term with user, and I'm forgetting it, but anyway, I'm trying to think of it. Well, so here's one of the big examples. So think of a big, huge company, and they're trying to decide what type of computer or software to buy for a specific, thing, a specific function at the company. And let's say that the IT department is the only department that has any say in which one they pick. So what do you think IT is going to be looking for when they're trying to pick a software or a type of computer? I mean, think of it, if you were in charge of buying the computers for a company that everyone's going to be using, what are you going to be thinking about? So this is more true of, say, large companies 10 or 20 years ago. They're thinking about price. They wanted to save money. So they would buy the software or the computer that was the cheapest, but the IT department wasn't the end user. It was everyone else in the company. Then the end user would have problems because it was the cheapest, but it was the user interface and the ease of use and the design wasn't very user friendly. And so IT departments had to, like, they were always constantly focused on trying to help the end users use the product more and more. And I'm thinking of large companies, the end user is the one who selects the product. So it's not all about just getting the cheapest one, but also the one that's easier to use and to learn. Anyway, market status. I'm not totally sure what Dr. Fogelman means by this, but in the consumer world, sometimes you want a product to just send a certain signal to people and say something about yourself. A podcast I used to listen to, I haven't listened to it in a while, was Freakonomics. I can't remember the full. I mean, there's a book called Freakonomics, and it's a podcast by one of the authors of the book. They were looking at studies that economists had done on Priuses, and they're trying to figure out why do people buy Priuses, and the hypothesis was that what they want to help protect the environment, sort of a thing. And what they found out is that the people who were buying Priuses that wasn't necessarily the primary reason they were buying it, but it was to send a signal to everyone that they did care about the environment. Anyway, so it was more about the signal than the actual function of being more environmentally friendly. If you think of fashion or even with smartphones, for example, some people will buy the most expensive phone just to send the signal that I have the most expensive phone. And it's not necessarily because they prefer that product or, anyway. So we're interesting. As humans, we're interesting. We're not always straightforward. When you're thinking of the workplace, you have to consider the clothing that's being worn, especially if you are requiring the use of certain PPE. And there are different ways of limiting the user. So chairs, some general concepts for chairs. If we were in RASC 102, so if you've who's had a class in RASC 102 or been there for a meeting or something. So the chairs there were specifically requested by Dr. Fogelman. He selected those. And there are several things that are adjustable. If you want an ergonomic chair, in air quotes, you want to find the chair that is the most adjustable. So there's not a one design fits all. I mean, so these chairs are one design, and you have to make it fit, right? Because there's no adjustment. I mean, I don't know, they hardly give in the back. I don't know, what do you guys think? Do they give much support? I guess they're okay. You guys are sitting in them, though, for over an hour. I'm not. So I'm curious what you think. How are these chairs? Are they okay? Maybe on par for the typical classroom chair. Standing also is not, standing versus sitting isn't necessarily better than the other, but it is good to alternate between them. So I don't know, maybe we should have parts of the class where I sit down and you guys stand up. Just kidding. That would be funny and interesting and weird. All right. So the chair should maintain the curvature of your spine, and the goal is to minimize the pressure. Yeah.
other places, like that's like considered like cruelty, like
To make them stand.
at the checkout.
The new
Isn't that
thing
a
is like have a standing desk.
Yeah.
Standing desk.
So I wasn't aware of that thing with cashiers, but so with standing and sitting, one isn't necessarily better than the other, but being able to switch is better than just having one or the other. So so I have a sit stand workstation at my office. I brought it from my past job anyway, and there are a lot of days where I just sit at my computer, but then there are other days where I stand for a while, and then once my feet or my knees start hurting, then I'll sit. Having the option to switch between the two is better than having one or the other. And really, the goal is to avoid static. It's not on this, not on here, but you want to avoid being static. You want to move a little bit every once in a while. So if you are stuck at a workstation, at a computer where you have to sit all the time some breaks in. I mean, hopefully that's allowed, that's permitted. But like with cashiers, I don't know that I guess I mean, I know they have timed breaks, but I don't know if it's like, okay, you're on your break after 4 hours of working, but
always that we or stand however they so it's like I don't know, I guess it's a good thing when they come less than
yeah. So if you were, say, imagine you are an ergonomist for a big retail chain. What sorts of things could you do to help the cashier out? So a chair, like one that gets them to the correct working height, right? So maybe one of those chairs that spins down or up, or I don't know, but tall stool has some cushion. What else? Yeah, breaks, good. I was reading, there's some research that says it's about every hour that you're supposed to take a break. And I think it leaned more on the break side. So it was like every 52 minutes, you should take a 17-minute break, something like that. That's like they found that was the ideal balance in a study they did for productivity. So it wasn't even looking at the health side. It was just looking at productivity. And they found that people who did take the breaks, they stayed fresh, and they were able to get more done at the end of, by an aggregate at the end of the 8 hours or whatever, than people who just tried to, which sometimes I do. It's just trying to get stuff done. And that might not be as productive as breaks. Thinking of the human factor side with their screens, that's something I haven't really paid attention to with cashiers, is just what their screen looks like on the other side. But obviously you want to make it so that it's really easy to distinguish whatever the buttons, the options are on their screen. It's easy to distinguish. It's not so bright that they're going to get eye strain. Also, did I mention the wrist braces in this class? Yeah. So whenever I go to Walmart, I'm always, well, more and more I use the self-checkout, but when I do go through the line, I'm looking to see if they have a wrist brace. So there's obviously a problem there with the way they scan things, and I'm not sure totally what the ideal solution for that is, but the self-checkout might be, I mean, some people argue because it might reduce the demand for cashier jobs. At the same time, though, you're not having cashiers doing all the scanning. You're kind of spreading it out among all the customers. So every customer does a little bit, and then no one gets hurt. There's also the Amazon. Can anyone describe how the new Amazon market stores, whatever they're called, work? I think they're interesting. Yeah. I'm not sure. It might work that way. But I've seen Fry's also has been doing that. They have little scanners you can pick up at the front. So you scan as you go, and then you just like walk out when you're done. Yeah, I didn't realize the chip thing. All I knew was that you can walk in, grab your stuff, and walk out. And I'm sure it communicates. It may communicate with your phone or something. I don't know, but um, anyway, that's cool. But some people have mentioned how that puts cashiers out of work, sort of a thing. To be honest, and I think I don't want to get on a soapbox again, but I think automation is coming. And I don't know what the best thing to do about it is, but there will come a point where, like, to make a smartphone, for example, everything from the mining to the processing to the assembly and manufacture, that whole chain and all the transportation in between will be 100% automated. Not a single human will touch the product, the materials until it comes off the end line. So what do we do? That might be in 100 years. I don't know. But what are we supposed to do for work? I don't know, but it's interesting. Okay, it does talk about static loading. Real briefly on this, the cartilage between your vertebrae in your spine, they don't have blood vessels. So like you don't have arteries and veins that go into cartilage. Just like, the skin around your ear has blood vessels, but the cartilage inside your ear doesn't have any blood vessels going into it. So how does it get food? Your cartilage needs food and oxygen and stuff, just like every other part of your body. Actually, I guess I'm not totally sure about the ears. How do the ears get? I think it might just be simple diffusion because it's so thin that from the surrounding tissues it just kind of diffuses in, and the waste diffuses out. With your discs in your back, they're not quite so thin. So simple diffusion does happen, but if you're sitting all day in a chair and you're not moving around, that your back starts to say, hey, there's a problem here. I don't like this. But what happens is as you move, as your spine twists and turns throughout the day, it kind of compresses and decompresses different parts of those discs, and that helps the diffusion move more quickly. So if you've been sitting all day, there are parts, especially maybe towards the center of that disc, that haven't had any oxygen, any food all day, and they start to die. And that's bad, obviously. So your disc can start to get weak and then die. That's possible. That would be kind of extreme, but usually they get weak and then they get hurt, is what happens. So you want to reduce, this is basically saying the same thing as being static. So you want to reduce how fixated a posture is. You want to make sure that people can move around and they're not confined in a little space. So this is the RASC chairs. We can't do it, but if you ever sit down in a chair that you can tell there's some things you can adjust, play around with it. Don't just sit down and deal with either like the blood in your legs getting cut off because your feet are dangling, or you don't have enough back support, or the armrests are like too high or too low. See if you can adjust this stuff and go ahead and adjust it, especially if it's going to be a long class. I would recommend it. So you can adjust, a lot of times you can adjust the angle of the seat pan. You can adjust, so the recline tension is how easily you can lean back. You can recline in the chair. And some people like it real firm. Some people like it soft, and that's why something that's adjustable, everything is adjustable, is the most ergonomic. There's not a one size fits all. These are recommendations for a computer workstation. So you want the viewing distance to be between 1.5 to 2 feet away. And you want the viewing angle to be, so you can see the top of the screen should be almost in line with your eyes. And the bottom of the screen should be a bit lower. We don't have the angle here, but that's about the angle. You want wrists straight and at elbow height. You want to make sure that, so what happens is if the seat is too high and your feet dangle, then there's a lot of pressure here because of the weight of your lower leg, and it starts to cut off the blood supply to down below, and it doesn't feel good. If it's too low, then your knees are up here, and I think it can start to cut off blood at your hips. I'm trying to remember, is anyone really tall and sat in a really short chair for a long time? And how does it feel? Where? Okay. Yeah, so I think it kind of, it puts strain on your back, and I think it kind of cuts off blood here because you have, it's a weird angle. Now this computer, this monitor is one of the Goldie monitors. There's an actual tube that shoots electrons at the screen. That's not how our screens work now, but they also have, there's an old school mouse here. My ergonomics professor said the very first recommendation he makes for every workstation is a wireless mouse. If you do a lot of work on a laptop, consider a wireless mouse. So I used to use Macs quite a bit, and I actually really liked the trackpad because it's pretty big and it lets you do a lot of things. A lot of times I preferred it to a mouse, but you have to think for yourself what is more comfortable. And but generally, if you have like one of those little trackpads and you're like clicking and dragging with like 2 fingers or whatever, I know my hand starts to not be happy after very long. If you have any of that, think about getting a wireless mouse. Even if you're at a desktop, what happens is, if you've ever used a wireless mouse, you kind of know, the weight of the cord hanging off the desk or whatever, like pulls the mouse, and so you're constantly like pulling it back or moving it around so that you can do your work. Wireless mouse is a great thing. So a couple of case studies. Now we're not there to measure this, but she's sitting too far back from the monitor. What issues could that cause if your monitor's too far? What do you think? Good. So you may strain your eyes, trying to squint and see what's actually on the screen. Her wrist is not in neutral position. Do you think her wrist is going to be very happy at the end of the day if that's how she's working all day? And a document holder, I've thought about this. I guess maybe I'm lucky because rarely does my job as one of its tasks require sort of transferring information from a document onto something on the computer. Although like for clerical work, that's more of a thing still. And so you would want something to hold the document right up here next to the screen. So it's a simple eye movement back and forth to do your work rather than down and then up, down and up. Has anyone ever seen someone who so they have their regular monitor and then like a widescreen monitor turned on its side? I always wondered about why people do that, but I think it's so that they can look at a whole document, like a whole page on one screen, which would be convenient. If you have it widescreen, you can't see, if you look at the whole page all at once, you can't really read it. Anyway, if you can get 2 monitors, that's always good too. You'll increase productivity. Has anyone ever seen those phones that have you've got, I mean, these are more old school. You don't see them really in residential areas anymore. I mean, just on in the office. They've got like this ball thing on the back side of the phone. What is that for? So it's for using the phone like while you're typing. So that's a little bit older. Now we would say get a headset. Get a headset so you can be on the phone and be typing at the same time. You don't have to, you can see, I mean, you can kind of see how she's lifting her shoulder so that she can squeeze the phone and hold it up to her ear and mouth and still trying to do work. You can do that for a little while, but after, several minutes or an hour, it's not going to feel very good. The arm for her monitor wasn't installed in the correct location to solve that distance problem. So recommendations for her is to get a document holder, reposition the monitor for optimal use, and a wireless headset. Wireless technologies are amazing. I've been wanting to get some Bluetooth headphones. I just haven't yet, but I haven't been working out as much as I should, but when I am working out a lot, then I don't like the cord for my headphones getting in the way, either if I'm lifting weights or running, kind of moves all around. So that's why I've been thinking about wireless headphones is convenience. So here's another case study. You can see her wrists are not exactly neutral with her arms. She needs to, either this needs to come up or she needs to go down a little bit. She's got a little bit of extension in her wrists. So here he's recommending getting a new chair, and so we'd have to look at the keyboard height after we get the new chair to see if it's okay still, or if the chair improves that posture with her arms and wrists, or if it needs to be changed. The width and height of the armrests are not adequate. So you can see it was probably designed for someone larger than her. You would want to get a chair where you can, so if you go to RASC 2, then you'll, 102, not RASC 2, RASC 1, room 102. I believe the armrests come in and out. They come in and out, they come up and down. I don't know if you can like tilt the angle, but they're one of the more adjustable chairs that I've seen. So you'd want something like that where you can move it in, the person can move it in so they can actually rest their arms. And the seat pan here is too deep. It would need to lean more. This is the same case study. So you can see also her chair either needs to come down or she needs a footrest. Even if I'm at home and like the height, the height is perfect for my legs, but I'm doing work on a laptop or something. For some reason, I don't know why, but for some reason, I still I act like I'm in a chair where the chair is too tall and I have my knees up and I don't know why. And so after a while, my calves are not happy because they've been holding that position for a while. One random tangent. Does anyone sleep with their hand under their head like this, under their face? So a lot of people do. I think it's over 50% of the population does that, but it's not good. If you put too much strain on there. So imagine you're holding that for like 6 or 8 hours. If there's a lot of strain on your wrist, it can cause carpal tunnel or other issues. Anyway, just random fact. When I first learned that, I started to try and not do that because I sometimes I still do it, but I try to. I think it's like a comfort / security thing. I don't know exactly why I do it, but I started thinking, why do I do this? And I mean, I don't know, but I think it's kind of both of those. Like it supports my head, but also I know it's not going to like roll off the pillow or something. I don't know. Anyway, if you do that, consider changing that behavior. You know, for most people, it's not a problem, but it could lead to wrist issues. So some of the same. Oh, actually, this is a different. Is this a different person? I'm not totally sure, but the height, it's a little bit high for her compared to her eyes. And you would, once you get a new chair, then you'd want to review that and see if it still works. So some options: get a smaller chair or one that's more adjustable. Armrest should be adjustable. Seat pan should be adjustable. Once you get the new chair, make sure that everything else still fits. There are some easy things you can do. I'm not sure exactly what he means by bilateral mouse use. If she's like using 2 mice, I didn't notice that, but basically though, it can lead to issues with so the abductor, that muscle, I don't know which one it is exactly, but it moves your thumb away. You know, if you're in an anatomical position, it moves your thumb away from your body. And posture could help there. There are lots of simple things you can do. One last quick story, because we're at the very end. My ergonomics professor told this story. If I already told it to you guys, then tell me like, hey, we heard this, we're good. But he's after a while, just randomly, his shoulder was killing him. He could barely lift it, up like this, and it hurt a lot, and it was clearly not happy. He talked to a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon, to see. And what do you think the orthopedic surgeon is going to recommend? Surgery. So if you're a hammer, then everything else is a nail. So the surgeon, of course, is going to recommend surgery. He didn't really want to get cut open for this. So he talked to his friend who was a chiropractor, and they were just talking. And they realized that his briefcase, so I don't have a briefcase, but his briefcase was kind of, they're just talking about his behaviors, his daily behaviors. His briefcase was kind of fat. It was wide. And so while he was walking, he had to kind of hold it out a little bit so it wouldn't hit his legs. So he bought a more narrow briefcase, and in a couple weeks it was gone. So a lot of times with ergonomics, if you just do a little bit of detective work, talk about it, think about it, you can identify one little simple thing you could change to make a big difference and avoid getting cut open by a surgeon. So thanks, guys.